You know, for the most part, we all take pictures of board games nowadays. But what if someone came across a photo that you took for their game? And then they asked you, hey, can I pay you to take more photos? Would you say no? In this series, I'm gonna show you how to take next level product photography with board games. What you're about to see is a series of videos that have taken me years to learn. And it's something that many would charge thousands of dollars for. So pay attention closely because we're about to take your photography to the next level. And this series now has begun. So the first question to answer, what camera should I buy? So to answer that, I want to show you the differences between 4 cameras with an iPhone 12 Pro Max, a beginner's Canon Rebel T3i, an entry-level Canon 80D, and a full-blown professional-grade Canon 1DX Mark II. So let's see if you can spot the differences and guess which one is which before I put a label on them. And then at the very end of the series, I'm gonna do the exact same thing to test your eyes to see how much you have progressed from now till then. Here we go. Let me know in the comments how many you guessed correctly so we can compare that to the final episode. So how many did you get right? Now I know I kind of mentioned this in the prequel episode, but surprisingly, our phones nowadays hold up very, very well. It's very scary, the quality that you get by just pressing a button. But with that said though, you want to pay attention closely to the shadows. That's how you can easily tell the differences between the photos. So the shape of the box kind of just melts away with the phone, and you can't even tell where the box is in the iPhone photo. So the shapes of the shadows blending in with the background are just splotchy. And I think iPhone cameras automatically apply a ton of smoothing effects. So instead of seeing grain, you just see these giant smooth blobs everywhere. Now this isn't really news, right? Because for smartphones, their biggest weakness has always been low light. Now with the Rebel T3i, it's a little bit better. The shape of the box is still distinguishable all the way through, but there are a ton of grain and lots of noise throughout the photo. Now this was a raw file and you can barely push the exposure and brightness overall without introducing so much noise. We'll get to the whole nitty-gritty about what raw means and everything when we get to the edits and capturing the photo, but for now know that a raw photo gives you a ton more information. So if you can barely manipulate that information to begin with, then that shows you kind of the differences in camera quality. Now in comparison to an iPhone, yes, to the untrained eye, the iPhone picture may look better initially, but here's what you have to pay attention to. Look at how overly smooth the iPhone photo is. There's not enough texture and it almost looks fake, like a digital image photoshopped out and then put onto a solid background. With the DSLR, you gain shape integrity in the shadows. You also see the texture of the box, and you also see the details in the red aura of this character that is miles ahead of an iPhone. All the noise can still be decreased in post. I didn't do any kind of noise reduction in post. So with that said, even with phone quality getting better and better, it still is pretty distinguishable between a phone and a DSLR. You have to train your eyes to see through all of that. Now let's introduce the third camera. Look at the massive differences between the two photos. The 80D is an entry-level camera, and this photo honestly is enough to sell and to market with. Both photos have the exact same lens, exact same lighting setup, everything is the same. Even the edits are the same, so the only major difference is the camera body. Now notice how much more vibrant the 80D is. There's barely any noticeable noise. And to look at clarity, look at some of the letters and the leather jacket worn by the main character. In the Rebel, you see lots of fringing, and fringing are these purple lines that kind of glow around the letters. That's bad. That means your camera isn't able to focus in on different wavelengths of light. And then, if you look at the leather jacket, this looks like a 1990s arcade game of like Mario and Donkey Kong. But in the 80D, you gain back a lot of details and there is minimal fringing. Now lastly, let's introduce the final camera. Now you'll notice that right away, lots of the letters are out of focus. It's not a bad thing because this is a full frame camera and the 80D is a crop sensor. So you have to stand further away in order to get the same angle with the 80D. Most full frame cameras are professional grade because there is no crop like there is in the 80D. There is zero fringing on the 1DX, and you can see practically every single square of this linen-like texture on the board. Zooming back out, the clarity, the punchiness, the true-to-life colors, and the separation of the box to the background makes it look very 3D. So all the technical details aside, let's go ahead and revisit that question. Which camera should I buy for product photography? The Canon 80D. Most of the time I recommend the Canon M50, but that's mostly for video because it shoots in 4K and is also very user-friendly. I still stand by that camera, but for product photography specifically, I would definitely go with the 80D and anything above that. The Canon 5D Mark III, the Mark IV, the new mirrorless cameras R5, R6. I shoot Canon, so I can only speak from experience on the Canon side. Reason why the 80D, in this case as you saw, you don't get that loss in detail like you would with the beginner's camera, like with the Rebel T3i, but you still get nice, crisp detail. The downside to the 80D though, is that your studio light has to be pretty bright to compensate for the 80D's inability to push exposure in the edits. It can't go higher than like 800 ISO before you start losing detail in your photos. So bottom line, the Canon 80D or anything above that, the R5, the R6, the 5D Mark III, Mark IV, and so on. Now next up, a lens. Ideally for board games, you need a macro lens, which means that it's able to focus in on the subject to see really nice, refined detail. Here I'll be using a Canon f2.8 100mm macro. And I also use two other lenses. I use the 85mm f1.4 and the Canon f4.0 24-70mm lens. If you want a full breakdown of all those camera details, I'll link that video up here and also link the items down below. So let's talk about the lenses for a sec. So a rep from Canon once told me, and it's stuck with me ever since, that you date the camera body and marry the lens. This means that it is better to invest in a nice lens over a camera body, and that is so true because your lenses will stay with your toolkit and will stay with you for most of the time because it can always be carried over from camera to camera. And the lenses make a ginormous difference. I'd rather have a super nice lens with a subpar camera body over a really nice camera body with a subpar janky lens. Now with that said, if you want a cheap but good camera lens that can work really well with product photography, here's what I would recommend. The Canon 50mm 1.4, it's $100, which is expensive, but in the camera world, it is one of the cheapest lenses that you can buy. So what's amazing about this lens is that you have a low f-stop. And because you have a low f-stop, it allows you to get a nice focus around your games and individual pieces. And if you're using a full frame camera, then it still gives you a good focal length for getting a shallow depth of field while also not being too zoomed in. You also want to think about where you're shooting your product pictures because you want to make sure that you have enough space in your room in order to be moving far back enough for photos. 50mm does require a decent amount of distance, but that also depends on your camera, you know, what pictures you're taking, what you're trying to get in frame, and so on. The 85mm, you have to stand really far back, so just a heads up. Personally, for me, and for a couple other photographers that I shoot with, we all agree in the sense that we don't really recommend getting the kit lens. I would rather wait and just take your time and get a better lens. Here's the differences between a kit lens at 50mm versus a prime lens at 50mm. Exact same camera body, same edits, same lighting. Even if the prime lens is darker, the differences in details are night and day. You can easily make your photos look professional with the prime lens over a kit lens. But bottom line, 50mm f1.4, take a look at that lens, link down below if you want a clean, budget-friendly, entry-level lens. If you have more to spend, I would recommend getting the Canon 35mm f2.0. This is a complete all-arounder lens, is extremely versatile. I did a complete review on it up here. But what's amazing about it is that you can use it for almost everything. You can use it for a ton of situations. It is a wide-angle lens, but it can also get pretty close to your subject and can get things out of focus and get that nice dreamy bokeh with f2.0. It's also image stabilized, which doesn't matter too much for photos, but if you ever want to think about doing videos as well, it doubles up for videos and for photos. I took photos of everything with that setup and made it work, from landscapes, portraits, family sessions, engagement sessions, you name it. I took photos with that setup. So if you want something that you're gonna hold on to for a long time and something that you wanna learn with and kind of just stick to, that setup, you'll be solid with. Now, if you're moving on or if you want to set goals for some professional grade lenses, the first one I would look at to get crisp and refined detail, like I mentioned earlier, my go-to lens for most of the time for product photography, for board game photography, that would be the Canon 100mm f2.8. I love this lens. It totally changed the game for me. The price for an L series red ring, that just means that it's made for professionals, is at $1,200 or $1,300 US now, and that is a crazy chunk of money. But it is, however, less expensive than the other L series. You should see the latest mirrorless lenses that are going for like $2,500. However, I would love to play with those lenses someday though. Okay, now in terms of my usage, I would say I use the 100mm macro about 40 to 50% of the time for all the product photos. I love showing a ton of textures and details in all the components, so it is my go-to, not just for close-ups, but also for specific details from far away as well. The 85mm f1.4 is my most expensive lens in the toolkit that I have currently. It is also the very first L series that I got as well. Initially, I did get it for portrait and for family photos that I still use for that as well. But for board games, oh man, there's this look that the 85mm gets that is, it's hard to explain, but put simply, it makes everything look so good. So when I can, and if I have enough space in my studio, and if the board game that I'm shooting is small enough, then I will definitely try to use the 85 to get these really punchy, dreamy images. The downside though, aside from having to move super far from these games, is that you also can't get too close up to different components. The minimum distance this lens requires is a lot more than other lenses. So therefore, the differences between this and the macro lens is that you will definitely not get the same amount of detail like you would for a macro lens. So I do use this lens around 20 to 30% of the time, especially for the box photo. And my last lens is the Canon 24-70 f4.0 lens. I will almost always use the previous two prime lenses for product photos. However, if I need a wide angle shot showcasing all the components, and maybe that 85mm is too far, and I can't fit everything in one frame, then this is my go-to lens to fix that. The reason why I love this lens is that yes, it is a zoom lens, so it is convenient for you to just spin it and then get all sorts of distances in between. But despite it being a zoom lens, it's actually crazy crispy. If you're not familiar with the terminology, prime lenses have a fixed focal length, so you have to move physically forward and backwards in order to get the distance that you want. But they produce a very refined, sharp, high quality image. On the other hand, zoom lenses, the ones that you can spin to get a different distance, those allow you to get a range of lengths instantly, but the trade-off is typically a tiny loss of image quality in comparison to primes. You basically sacrifice efficiency for quality and vice versa. With that said, this particular zoom lens has an insane image quality, so I can barely tell the differences between this and a prime lens. Okay, so those are all of my recommendations for camera bodies and lenses. I would always recommend getting a better lens because they will carry on with you forever. Camera bodies, they change practically every year. It's almost always better to save and get a really solid lens. And with that, the next episode, we'll be talking about the rest of the gear involved in product photography. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions about what we talked about today, and I'll see you all in episode 2.